We are continuing the Becoming Centered in Uncertainty. And I'm curious to hear, what are you doing when you find yourself in uncertain times? How do you bring yourself back? What is it that you apply in your life? Leave a comment. I'm really curious about this. I just don't say this to say it. This is what I do. I'm here to get other people's insights because we all have this wealth of knowledge, don't we? And that brings to mind our next guest is Tom Rosenak, who talks about the diamond mind approach. And with that comes mining those inner diamonds within, because we all tend to deny ourselves that divine wisdom that we all hold, those diamonds in the rough. And he is talking about conversations that ask more questions about how are you approaching the situation, instead of shoulding on yourself of what didn't go right, what you should have done well in, shift the script as I talk about. So tune in, hear what Tom has to say, and I'm curious if you're willing to get down and dirty with him in conversations. We'll see you there.
Very powerful to begin with anchoring, and we can do it in small ways, even in the midst of busyness.
Oh, yes. And I think that's a good point to make, because this is why I invited you here, is as we've talked, with the open stance gatherings, um, you just bringing that awareness. We speak the same language. It's just like every time you said something, it's like, that's right. Yeah, Tom, I mean, everybody does in that community. It's a beautiful, wonderful community. Although you're just little sparky insights coming up. It's just like,
Thank you for that.
yay, I want to have more of that. And I'm going to be selfish and invite Tom onto my
I'm delighted
podcast.
you did, and let's let the conversation flow with intention.
Oh, of course. No pun intended there, right?
Was directly to your mission that I use. And I think we should talk about language sometime in the conversation.
Oh, of course. Of
Yeah.
course. Well, again, thank you so much for being here with me today, Tom. Because it's so important right now in our lives to remember that we do have a centered point, right? That it's important to remember that place within ourselves that brings us back in times of uncertainty. And this is why I wanted you on here, uh, because of the connection that we made in the open stance community. And for those who are tuning in and have been following me, remember that Anne Van Aaron had shared about the open stance approach in the Wanting More podcast series, Wanting More in 2024. And Anne Van Aaron is the founder of Potentials, and she is amazing. And I'll put that link also in the description for everyone if they're interested in attending the Open Stance community gatherings. They're twice a month, and you get to connect with wonderful people such as Tom here. So,
Good.
Tom, can you just share a little bit about you before we get into this conversation of, becoming centered in uncertainty?
Sure, be delighted to. So the first thing I will say is that I came to the human development field through failure and desperation. And as I look back at it, had I done well in school like my sister, I would have been on a completely different path. And God weaves things that aren't good into good and brings good out of them because it was a miserable experience. I didn't know learning was fun until I was 28. And of course, we didn't know things about ADD and all of that. But I got into presentation skills because I was petrified of giving group presentations. So I said, I wonder if you could learn that. And then it eventually was, I wonder if I could teach that. So I was on a learning and teaching path at a time when someone would look and say, well, he can't be a teacher. They'd look at my report card. And so I don't know why this is, but many people don't turn to higher power until they're desperate.
Mm.
And so I'm working on turning to it when I'm not even aware of my desperation, because it's better to go to the source than to monkey mind, as we were talking about before. So I have been in the corporate training space since the turn of the last century, starting with the persuasive arts, sales, presentation, influence without authority, conflict management. And then I moved into executive coaching, and I'm the author of the Momentum Playbook, which was more a personal love, not a business pursuit. But now I'm starting to find ways to use it in the corporate environment. So my company's Diamond Mind Enterprises, and it's based on the story Acres of Diamonds, which is the idea that we have acres of diamonds, but we tend to run to greener pastures and seek for things outside ourselves to fill the void. So it would be aligned with your tagline, from the inside out. And
Yes.
because there's nothing out there if we don't know why we came.
I know that's amazing. I love that, right? And your tagline is something to the effect of, if you could remind me about the diamonds, and um you mentioned in kind of like your tagline about, we all have diamonds. It's about forging them. Or
Yeah, yeah.
can you help me out with that?
Sure. So the short the tagline from the Acres of Diamond, which is an interesting story in itself, that Temple University was founded by a gentleman that gave that talk over 5,000 times to raise money for the founding of Temple University. But the tagline is, you have acres of diamonds within. That's just a fact. Then your responsibility, because diamonds show up with a lot of coal on them, is to do some dig diamond mining. So it's really about inner resourcefulness.
Mm,
And I work only with people who are resourceful, but in the area that they're stuck, which they come to me in, they're not tapping into their inner resources. And it
mm.
doesn't matter how successful and how powerful they are in this area, whatever it is, they need to put on their diamond spelunking suits and do a little bit of digging. And I help people to do that and have processes for that.
Yeah, that's really because of the work that you've done, right? You've dug in your mind and created, right, those new neural pathways and built your emotional intelligence. And, I would never guess that way back when that you wouldn't be able to, be a public speaker. You hold yourself so well, you're so calm. I think that's the key right there, is that you're calm, and what you speak is very authentic. You come from authenticity. And that's also another reason why I knew that this community would really enjoy hearing your story, and how you can support us in these uncertain times.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about your session on dropping the mask, and I look at it similarly, but a little differently. We have to wear masks in the world. You can't bare your soul to every human being. It isn't time appropriate. There isn't a mix. But what we want to do is shine through our masks and remember that we are not our mask and we are not our role. So if you're a mother, you're always a mother. But when you come into the meeting, and we could use them, hats are easier to picture on
Yeah.
Zoom. You're not really wearing your mother hat. Some people forget that, and it doesn't really work. But you don't drop it. You're still a mother, but you aren't just a mother. And so the masks are so that people can recognize you and get what they need in the moment. But we need to align each of our masks, and this is what authenticity is they don't get the fullness of my soul because we have 10 minutes, but it better not disconnect from my soul.
Mm.
And many times it does. I'm trying so hard to be something, and that's where it becomes disingenuous, and then you have to keep it up like an act. But
Mm.
it's that you are more than the moment needs, but only 100% of the time. And so the mask is just a way or a hat to know. Like if I put on my coaching hat, I'm very different than I am now. My goal is to ask, to listen, to challenge with grace and with peace, not to advise. But occasionally I have a consulting hat on, very, very different. People are looking for me for answers. But if they're a coaching client, they're looking to ask more resourceful questions. So I'll say something like, if I challenge gracefully and say, if you were to get an answer, the best answer possible to that question, where would it bring you? And they often look up and say, in circles. So that's what we call a
Ah.
dead end question. It's not that it's the wrong question, but questions beg an answer. And if the question doesn't dig more deeply, then we need a generative question. So, for example, if I had three things happen in a row, I lost the contract, and I said, April, why does that keep happening to me? Your best answer, or if I'm talking to my inner self, my best answer would be, I don't know, you're just the kind of person, unlucky person that happens to. In other words, no new resources. So if I notice the pattern and say, how can I shift my focus so
Mhm.
that that's less likely to happen? We live in the world of gravity, friction, mortality, and it happens. And you can
Oh,
think
yeah.
what it rhymes with. But if we will focus differently, we'll be more resourceful to meet the challenges. So the first thing I always say is pay attention to the questions you're asking yourself. And then don't should all over yourself. Just
I
notice
love that.
and
Don't shit all
say,
over yourself.
yeah,
Yes.
and just notice and say, I'm asking why when a how question would be more effective. Which doesn't mean the question why is always wrong. I've heard people say, well, don't ask why. Well, no, Simon Sinek says start with why. But when you're uh, in a state of stagnation, why is not the right question. The right question is, I'm noticing how. How can I respond differently? Because we know what's the definition of insanity?
Yep. It's repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Yes.
Yeah. And I riff off that and I say, insanity is having the same conversation with ourself, with our spouse, with our children, with our boss, with our direct reports, with those folks in cross-functional and expecting different results. And 100% of us do that. But what would it look like if we could notice it and shift it more frequently? To say,
Hmm.
the question, every time I say X, she says Y. She doesn't like it. I don't like it. I keep asking, she keeps responding. That's a dead end relationship, which doesn't mean she's a dead end relationship, doesn't mean I'm a dead end. It means we need a new conversation. So I say insanity is having the same conversation with ourselves and expecting different results. And then after that, I say, what conversation would produce more resourceful relationship. And
Hmm.
that's the question that pays. And
Yeah,
then
and
be
it goes
willing,
back.
as you said, to risk it.
Yes, that's the risk too. Oh, there's so many little nuggets that you were saying in there, and it just reminds me of that the conversation, going back to ourselves. What are we saying to ourselves? How are we seeing ourselves? And you said it so perfectly, Tom, about like shift. I call it shift the script, because
Yeah.
that's all it is. It's those ruminating thoughts over and over again that we have in our minds. When I read Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, and he talked about the little voice in your head, it just blew me away because it was like, oh my gosh, I do have a little voice in my head,
Yeah.
and so
And
just
I
being
call it the inner
aware of that.
brats.
Hmm.
I call it the inner brats. So a lot in what you just said. And I would just add, whenever I need to flip the script, the least powerful thing to do is to create a new script and have a war between the two. That's why affirmations, as they were taught to me, never worked. And then when people say they work, I listen to what they do differently and I know why it didn't work. Mine were like this, April. I'd look in the mirror and I would say, I am abundant. And the mirror would look back and say, no, you're not. You're dead broke. And then I'd say, I'm abundant. Maybe if I said it louder, no, you're not. You're dead broke. That tug of war is a waste of time. And turning it to 100 doesn't help. Just like the teacher would say, I will not disrupt the class anymore. And I'd have to write that in my bad handwriting. Well, she could ask me to do it 1,000 times because there was nothing going on here any differently. I did it because compliance.
Yeah,
So
and you were pointing, for those who are listening on the podcast, he was pointing to his heart space. There was nothing
thank you
going
for
on
pointing
there
that out. I do use a
when
lot
when
of
saying this affirmation. So then the key is, Tom.
questions shift the script, and heartfelt responses to resourceful questions.
Yeah, can you give us just an example of what that would look like? So somebody's facing some big, uncertainties about whether it's work or personal life, and they're finding themselves looking in that mirror every morning as they're brushing their teeth and, just thinking about the hamster wheel and nothing's going to change and, yada yada, all of that, which creates that discord, right? They're not connected, and then they're feeling that uncertainty about themselves. That's where it all comes from ourselves and then outwards. So, how can they apply what you had just said? What would that look like?
So, first thing that comes to my heart is remember it's a process, not an event. New
That's
script.
perfect.
It's so important because and I'm saying you because I'm looking at you, but I'm looking in the mirror. Our inner brats have been doing push-ups since we were children. They are well trained. And this is our first day in the dojo, and they already have a black belt. And so it requires belief that you will do it, and then awareness, and then here's the key word, practice. Practice. So I can give you an example from my own personal life, and that is that when I primarily viewed myself as a classroom trainer, and I was in the classroom sometimes more than 100 days a year. COVID hit, and I'm also very extroverted. So I was feeling isolated and I was making less money than a Walmart greeter. And I was beginning to question, should I get a real job? All of that stuff. And this went on for some time. And I was consciously aware, no, I still have something to give the marketplace. And I started shifting the questions instead of saying, well, you're done, hang it up. Say, how can I
Mhm.
approach this in some new ways? And they didn't all work right away. And really, the power of my network is what pulled me through. And it is when you start a new conversation. I'll just ask you this question, April. Have you ever had a time when someone who now is a close friend, the first couple of conversations didn't really go anywhere?
Oh,
But over
yes.
time, you came to appreciate them more. You came to learn how to talk differently to them, not by being disingenuous. Now we're back to not by pretend, but saying, if I were to position the conversation differently, she'd be more open or he'd be more open.
Yes. And
Yeah.
also, I recognized that I was actually having expectations of them that it wasn't fair to project onto them. So
Yeah.
being more curious and open to who they are and understanding their situation helped me to, let go of those judgments, and that happens all the time with my husband.
Yeah, so
I'm
so
just
it
being
happens
honest
in
here.
the casual and the primaries. So in every example where you've succeeded in that, you have applied the process that I teach. So we know intuitively what that's about. But in the area you're stuck, your default, and I find with female, particularly females that are successful in business, to be successful in business, they had to be warrior woman. And that enabled them to play well in a boy's world. It enabled them to get ahead. So we don't want to kick that woman off the rocket ship. But what got you here won't get you there. Warrior woman wants to take charge and make things happen. And in the area you're stuck, that creates one foot on the gas, one on the brake.
Oh, yes.
Never going anything. Like when people do wheelies
Yep.
intentionally, and for the podcast listener, I'm doing circular motions that are wheelies. We've all experienced it. Sounds like this. This is the audible version. I can't, but I have to. Well, he did it before, but you can't do it anymore. You've got to do it. You just got to do it, April. Well, you know what? You're gonna. Why did blah 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 blah? And so there's energy expanded,
Yep.
and it's going nowhere. So
Yeah.
when we
And then that just
notice that,
spirals downward within
it spirals
ourselves.
downward.
Yep.
And then
And
the
we really
voice
feel that in our bodies too.
ends. And the warrior woman then says, I told you this new business wouldn't work. Do it my way. And so, what processing is defined as processing is holding love, conscious, active, and present when anything other than love surfaces. It's the opposite of repressing. When we push it down, then it becomes like a sniper and it comes back and shoots at you. But when we pull it forward and we have compassion and we have a conversation, we don't have to kick this person off, but we don't have to give her the wheel. I mix metaphors. So if you're driving, it's a wheel. I don't know what a rocket ship has. I guess Houston, but which might be your
There's only
soul.
one way there.
Yeah. So bus is easier to define. Rocket ship is more powerful. But the idea is that all of our inner voices serve us at times,
Mm.
but each of us. So, for example, the voice of security. I love what you said about risk. I keep coming back to it. Is you said what you don't mean, first of all, you don't mean taking dangerous you don't mean become evil Knievel like a daredevil. What you are talking about is willing to come out of your shell and be a little more vulnerable, or as you used the word before, open to what could be, open to possibilities. And it is a form of risk, but it's not reckless. And so the same thing goes here. You say thank you to the voice of security. The voice of security says, Tom, don't make this phone call because she might say no. And she's as intentional about that as if there was a tiger outside, right? So if the voice of security looks outside and there's a tiger, you want to listen to that voice. Maybe it's not a good time to go out the front door. Or a car coming is more, we don't see too many tigers. But their job is to protect you. And they don't make these fine distinctions. And this comes all the way back, neuroscience says it comes all the way back to the reptilian brain. If you
Mm-hmm.
see a rock ahead and you think it's a bear and it turns out to be a rock, That's better than if you see the rock ahead and think it's a rock and it turns out to be a bear. So its default is run. And in the case of the bear, or in the case of the bear, that's a bad idea because they're faster. Hide, don't go forward. Freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. So my point is, that's a wonderful thing. We don't want to get rid of that. We don't want to derail that. That's called recklessness. But don't be surprised. You can't convert the voice of security to become the voice of aspiration. Its
Yeah.
job is to say, danger, 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 danger. So if you're processing, you hold your aspiration conscious, active, and present, and you say, thank you for protecting me. You're right. She may say no. And the inner CEO says, we're making the phone call. And over
Yes.
time, the voice learns that it's still welcome, but you might put the seatbelts on it and say, thank you. And this choice is not about security.
Mm,
But
yeah.
you'll never get the voice of security to be your aspirational self because that's not your job.
Yeah, it's not his job. And I love how you say, basically befriending it, right? Building a relationship with that,
Yes.
not to push that part of ourselves away, because then that's the gas and the brake.
Yes.
And that's where we just beat ourselves up and we just become stagnant or keep repeating the same behaviors over and over again because we don't know how to get out of that loop. And the words, what we hear and the sensations that we feel in our bodies, I say they're echoes. So they're
Okay.
echoes coming back. So if you've ever really experienced an echo, it sounds like it's right there up against your head. It's like very loud. And then over time, the vibration, right? It just dissipates a little bit and it'll become a whisper. So what you're saying, Tom, is exactly what I say about echoes. It's like befriending that, understanding that that's part of our protection and it's okay. And then also making that choice still, having the courage to do it, even though we are still a little scared or uncertain about the situation, but it won't hook us as bad. It won't keep us frozen or, flight out of the way. We'll
Well
be able
said.
to be more present with it, have that centered space, right, in that uncertainty.
And the inner CEO will look at the risks from the lens of the highest you possible and still will look at the risk and evaluate. You just don't have the voice of security evaluate the risks
Mhm.
because the best thing for you to do is to stay home and put some emergency food in the closet and certainly don't get on the Zoom. And I'm exaggerating it intentionally, but it really is protection is the highest value to that voice, but it's not your eyes because 100% of us die.
Yeah.
And so
And
if
it
your
doesn't
whole
make that
life,
momentum as right behind you, Tom. Those of you who are listening on the podcast, I hope you tune into the YouTube um, recording, because Tom, in the background behind him, it says make momentum. So that's the momentum. What is it that we want to carry forward? I think it's perfect of what you're saying, Tom, about asking the questions of ourselves. How do we want to show up today? How do we want to be living our lives in the next, you can project out, 2 years, but really talk about this week, because
or
that's what's going to
today,
get you there.
today,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think what we're doing now is powerful too, because language, I just love when you started risk. The first thing you said is, how do I mean this? And so when I make the statement, love is always sacrifice, I better explain what I mean. because there are people who say, imagine a man who has said, I did it all for my family. And he climbed, he became a partner in the law firm and kept getting more and more and more. And at some level, he did it for his family, but really he did it for himself, for his pride, because then the wife and children will say, well, it would have been good if we knew you.
Mhm.
So the word love, by very definition, is about setting something of a lower nature and picking it up something of a higher nature. So, for example, when the mother or parent, I shouldn't be uh, sexist here, when the parent gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning with a child that's throwing up, that's not the emotion of love. It's clearly an act of love. And love is in motion, but the emotion of love comes when you go to the park. I just had a chance to do that with my grandson, and the weather turned nice in Chicago during your month, April, and we don't get much nice weather. And you get this feeling, there's nothing I'd rather be doing than being with my grandson in the park. Well, that's not sustainable because it's going to snow and he's going to get the flu. So love is setting down. You couldn't make that statement at 4 o'clock in the morning when your child is throwing up with the flu. There's nothing I'd rather be
Yeah.
doing. So the love is not the emotion. That emotion we enjoy flows in a deeper way from love than any other action. But really, love is a decision. Couldn't be a commandment if it wasn't a decision to respond with the best you have, putting down my needs and picking up the needs of the other. So love is loving the other as other. And so when your inner CEO is communicating with the inner brats, there's a training element, just like there is when a child is being trained. You make choices and ask questions, and they don't want to hear it. They say,
Mm.
I've been running this inner show since you were in second grade. I'm not going to let go of that wheel. And so with compassion, we start saying, we've decided we're going to respond this way. We love you. Just like if a child, I love using it because we're all children, even if you have the gray hairs like I do, the child wants to go for the cotton candy. And you don't throw them out of the family and say, cotton candy, but you might have a little resistance. This is not the inner CEO says, you're going to the dentist tomorrow. This is not cotton candy time, right? And they rebel. So why do we expect our well-trained inner voices to just say, oh, she's got a new plan, I'll go along with that? No, 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 no. It's a process, not an event.
It's definitely a process. And as you're saying, these little every day that we do things for ourselves, we have to be selfish too and choose ourselves and say, no, I'm sorry to whomever, like external things. If you got to get a report done, you got to get a report done. You can't say, no, sorry, I'm giving myself some self-love today. That won't work. Although understanding that what you're doing in the moment is that momentum towards your own self care, your own self-love. And so by being able to um, say thank you, but no thank you to whatever it is, and giving back to yourself, then you don't feel that you are sacrificing so much. And I can speak from my own personal experience being a Navy wife for over 24 years. I mean, that's a lot of sacrifice. And that was for love. Um, leaving jobs, leaving friends and families, going to Japan, living there twice for a total of 10 years. Although when I returned the second time, it was like going home. But the first time it wasn't. It was very uncertain. I was so uncertain and just didn't know what to expect. But with my own connection, my own faith in myself and my husband and, finding that center for myself, then the uncertainty wasn't as big. It was still there. I'm not saying that everything's going to be rainbows and unicorns when you find that center, but you're able to make more clear decisions. You're able to manage yourself easier. Um, yeah, let me tell you, driving on the other side of the road on a very narrow street, which is considered a two-lane street. Uh, yeah, it was very nerve-wracking, but man, I can drive anywhere now. So there we
Yeah,
go. I have the
that's a
momentum now.
beautiful story. So, what we get from doing that is not what we're looking for at the moment. So if I were to join
Exactly.
you for a cup of coffee and hear about all the rich experiences you got being exposed to other cultures, learning to drive on the other side of the road, and just I could go on and on, you would, with great enthusiasm, tell me how many dividends came out of that choice that you made, somewhat kicking and screaming out of love for your husband. And
Oh, yes. Yeah, I wouldn't
this
change it
is,
for the world. It's
no, I
like,
can
and that's,
tell. I
yeah,
can
those
tell.
those
So the
challenging
point
times
is,
is what really build my emotional intelligence and
yes,
and where I found myself too. So,
we
oh yeah, it's
don't
good
get
stuff,
to get the instant dividends,
right?
and we still want them. And so what you were saying about self-care, that's why I need to have an inner CEO. That's Diamond Mind Thomas, because self is a hierarchy too. There is a level at which yourself is what they call in recovery, self will run riot. Me, 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 me. So self-care could become indulging the lowest rung of the self
Mhm.
ladder. And only if we connect to a inner facilitator that's already connected to source and to other people at a higher level, then self-care can become the same as narcissism. And our culture is full of it,
Mm,
where they say, you can't love others if you don't love yourself. And at a certain level, that's a truth if you define both those terms. But what it devolves into very quickly is my needs against the world's needs. So
mm,
somebody has to orchestrate all that. And to me, that's God. But however you perceive that or language that, because the ego self or the lowest self only wants pleasure, power, uh, immediate gratification,
yeah.
and unhealthy nowness for an unhealthy future. It doesn't look to the future.
No,
Somebody
it does
has
not.
to orchestrate the inner brats. And I recommend journaling or with a coach to see that there's someone inside you who knows she's here for a reason. She has a lot to give, and her gifts were not just to, in Christmas, just to sit in a room all day and play with those toys. It's to give it to others. And in our best moment, we realize that. In our worst moment, we're blind. And
Oh
so
yeah,
let's be more intentional about having that voice, the first voice, be the CEO, and the second voice be a contributor, but not in charge, because you can never give
exactly.
that voice enough.
Oh yeah, it'll take. And you talking about the ego, Tom, reminds me of Wayne Dyer, and he says ego is edging God out,
Yeah.
EGO. And so then that really separates us from ourselves, really, when we're in that egotistical selfishness, um,
Yeah.
and not seeing our own value, our own worthiness. That's what really puts those blinders on, because when we do see that within ourselves, then of course we want to share that with others. We see the benefits, the ripple effect of that beautiful momentum, right? As we're working from the inside out.
Yeah, and so both of those things are in us, meaning the kingdom of heaven is within, and we connect to it. The first thing when you connect with it is a desire to express and to add value. So there is an external component, but it starts with the internal component. Then you
Mhm.
take the ego, edging God out, and the same thing is true, the same process, but very different results and character. The ego wants to go out there and get what it can. So it starts within. What do I want? And not from the higher voice. What do I want? Very different tonality, but same question. I want that job. I want her. I want the pizza. I want this. And we have needs, but we're told to seek first the kingdom of heaven, and these things will be added to us. So these are the add-ons, but the core is the seeking, internal and external. And the add-ons are to enjoy. Pleasure is a gift from God, and
Mm,
certainly food is, and any of our quote pleasures. But it's not the aim of life. That's called hedonism. If pleasure is the aim of life,
yeah.
same thing. Self-care requires rest. It requires a little bit of decompressing. But that's not the objective of life. Make rest the all you need is a couch and a bag of potato chips. There's moments that's true, but that's not life. So we need to
Yeah.
have a hierarchy of values and put each thing in its place. And I can't speak for you, but I never can do that on my own. So
Mm,
I need conversations with people that I trust who can say, are you sure you're asking yourself the right questions? And I smile and I say, enough said. But
yeah.
sometimes I need more than that and say, where's that taking you? It's taking me down a hole. Well, how can you climb a ladder? I need that because the ego doesn't do that. Ego just wants
Mm.
to push through all that.
Yes, it sounds like you are a great accountability partner there, Tom, to just kind of reframe it and people can connect with you, through your coaching programs and whether it is, corporate or individual one-on-one to keep people aware of those blinds. We all have blind spots, right? And it comes up and we just don't see it. And having your perspective, an outsider, to see what's happening, like a bird's eye view, to bring more of a perspective in there, then that helps them to remove those blinders and make better choices or ask better questions, as you say,
Yeah,
through
well,
the
so that
conversation,
comes, the
right?
questions come first, then you notice what comes up, and then choice becomes real. When
Yes,
we're in the reactive cycle, in a sense, you're making choices. I went and got a pint of ice cream. I ate the whole thing and I watched it. You chose that at some level, but if you process it and then you do the same behavior, the choice is real. Like when I eat the cheesecake on my birthday, my wife makes a great cheesecake. She doesn't like cheesecake and she only makes it on my birthday. Well, I don't need to avoid that. But if I find myself sneaking cheesecake at 12 o'clock midnight, that's not choice, that's addiction.
yeah, yeah. And it's just good to be aware of the behaviors, right? We're habitual animals.
Yes,
We
which is
forget
good
that,
too. It would be
yeah,
awful if you had to reinvent all your habits each day. So
yeah,
what we want to do is examine which patterns
yeah,
serve our highest intention and which don't. And we might not be ready to change in one of them now, but we can begin the awareness right away, and there might be something more priority.
exactly. And then that will help to find more of a centered spot to work from. So that way, when people are experiencing, you know, overwhelm, anxiety, uncertainty, then they'll be in a better space within themselves to ask those questions and to move forward. Yeah. Oh, great conversation today, Tom. Thank you
Thank you so much.
so much for being here. I just could go on and on talking about all the things with you. For
Well,
those,
remember, we are connected, and if another conversation is ever useful off video or on video, I'm available because your energy and attitude makes a difference in those meetings that we
mm,
share. And I'm just
thank you.
delighted to be connected.
Thank you. And for those who feel the same way as me, it's like, well, who is this Tom? And, all the things that you shared and help them unpack things for them. How do they get a hold of you? What is your contact
Well,
information?
sure, delighted to. So you can go to digdiamondmind.com. And if you're a little curious, on the landing page is my version of the Acres of Diamond. It's a short video because all of my work connects to that story, but my work is coaching, training, and that's what drives it all. That's my diamond within. And LinkedIn, you can go, you just put Tom, Rosenak.com. And then if you go to aleadershipbeyond.com, that's the podcast that my colleague Adrian Guerrero and I do that came out of the pandemic. It was called Leadership Beyond Pandemic. And we decided, let's just call it Leadership Beyond. So those are three ways. And be delighted to meet any of you.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for being here, for building that momentum for others. I hope that those of you who are listening or viewing, that something sparked, your interest, or maybe you had an aha moment. If you could just share that in the chat, what you really enjoyed about this conversation, let Tom know how he has helped you mine some diamonds within you.
Love to
That
hear
would
it.
be great. Yeah. And hit subscribe, like, so that way you can be alerted when there are more episodes coming up. As you know, I have several friends that are diamonds in the rough. So
We
until next
all
time,
are diamonds in the rough.
yes, we are. So until next time, my friends, be well.